introductions to the three key speakers for this evening. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Pete Westall, who is the Mid Counties Chief Values Officer, part of the executive team at Mid Counties, and worked here for over 30 years. We know he doesn't look old enough, but it's definitely true. Pete is responsible for society's social responsibility and sustainability agenda, and he's the person that makes sure that our values are at the centre of our business. Has also a very commercial insight into Mid Counties, having worked as a commercial manager for many years. He's also the chair of Bright Futures, which looks after the survivors of modern slavery. And not that he would shout about it himself, but those of you who've Googled, you will find out that Pete has actually been awarded Co-operative of the Year for 2021, something we're very proud of, and I think talks about how passionate he is about cooperation. And then, not to be outdone, we've got Sarah Jane Moore, who's head of commercial food. She joins us this evening, having worked for Mid Counties for just 16 months, but has over 25 years of experience in retail. Is accountable for the products and the range in our food stores, and is also responsible, whether that's from the Co-op group or from other local suppliers. And she's absolutely passionate about fair trade, and so we'll add real substance and context to this subject. And then, last but not least at all, we're delighted. I have met with Brad a couple of times in the last week or so, and Brad's saying, you know, just be mindful, Tara, that you're setting me up here. But Brad is a lifelong cooperator, and is what we have called Mr. Fairtrade. So he joined the cooperative group from school, spending 38 years there, actually, after taking some retirement, which he puts in brackets, some years ago. He was key in the policy team around 1998, and the driving force between the group's ethical and responsible retailing agendas. So he's absolutely the person who has driven fair trade, strategic development of fair trade in cooperative circles and in cooperative societies, and he's actually been at the sharp end and seen the difference that fair trade makes, both from a consumer point of view, but also from a producer's point of view, and he'll be able to talk to you about that as well as. So we'd like this evening to be very much interactive, so we're asking for your questions. Peter's going to facilitate some of that this evening, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Pete. So thank you, Pete.
Tara, thank you, and thanks everybody. Thanks for your introductions as well, Tara. One other I'd like to call out if I can, because she's on here. Jules Farrell is chair of the Wolverhampton City Fair Trade Partnership, and has recently been nominated to be one of the Commonwealth Games baton holders as well. A large part of that was due to her work with Fair Trade in Wolverhampton, so welcome, Jules, as well. This evening. That's well-deserved honour. So Brad, if I can, I guess we've known each other since the late 90s, shall we say. Brad has been a great friend of the Society over many years. 2016, he presented, some of you may have seen, at our AGM alongside Phil Ponsonby as CEO, talking about the way the Society has worked with the group, but also in terms of other co-ops across the UK to promote fair trade. And I guess, Brad, that's probably a good place to start, really. In terms of the co-op being involved in fair trade, I guess the obvious question is why? Why did we first get involved as a movement back in, whenever it was, 26, 27 years ago?
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Tara, for the intro. I think the answer probably is as obvious as the question, really. You can go back to the very beginning in 1844 and talk about the birth of cooperation and the first store, the Rochdale Pioneers, and what all that meant and what it stood for, and the fact that a new business model was created, which was really a stand against exploitation. It was about equity, equality, and all the things that we know and love as cooperators, and really sparked a whole new people movement. And then fast forward 150 years, and the fair trade mark appeared as an opportunity to connect with the customers, I guess, and to bring fair trading to life and meaningful to consumers in their sort of busy shopping trips by the simple device that could go on packs. So the concept of fair trade was very much something that I think just resonated with Co-op values, absolutely. The mark itself launched in 1994, and it was just opportune that at the same sort of time, the Co-op itself was looking to, I guess, reposition itself or re-establish itself as an ethical business. So over the 60s, 70s, 80s, I think the business had lost its way rather in terms of what it actually stood for and why it was different in haste to compete with the emerging superstores and all the rest of it. So it was sort of the mid 80s, early 90s that the Co-op began to re-look at itself and began to really campaign again on an ethical platform and talk very much about responsible retailing. So come the emergence of the Fairtrade mark in '94, it just so happened that was the time that the Co-op was actually looking to campaign on issues such as animal testing, animal welfare, exploitation, organic food, all the things that today are sort of taken for granted as norms within the marketplace, that the Co-op were pioneering back then. And Fairtrade just happened to be in the right place at the right time for us to begin to talk about how everything is not rosy when you're buying chocolate bars. There are kids being trafficked, there is exploitation, people aren't being paid a fair price, and all of those things. And we used fair trade as a mark and a symbol at the outset to say, but there is a different way, and if we can make this work, this could become something big and could be really impactful in the coming years. So we embraced fair trade as a mark. We partnered very closely with the Fairtrade Foundation and set out a mission really to mainstream fair trade.
Mute, schoolboy error. So if you go back to that sort of time, Brad, you will have had, I guess, lots of different co-op societies, and this evening probably isn't the time to go into whys and wherefores. You must have faced some resistance, I would have thought, on the basis that price would have been a key determinant. We've run mainly convenience stores, I guess, at the time. There would have been issues on space, so there would have been issues on ranging. How did you overcome those sort of challenges right at the start? Because you would have got that. I think many members would have got that, but there would have been commercial pressures at play saying, is this really the right way to go?
Yeah, the issues were actually everywhere, and there was far more walls being put up compared to the support that was being garnered. And it was very much down to determination and just a handful of individuals at the outset that drove things through. So, and I think it's a really key message actually, how as individuals we can all play a part and be those. I mean, there's a fantastic quote actually, which my favorite quote is from a coffee farmer in Mexico, and he says that many little raindrops falling in the mountains make the mighty rivers flow. And it's really true of the fair trade movement, that it's about these raindrops, these individuals actually doing their little bit, becoming part of this river, and then creating this torrent of support. And we look back now at how all the great things that fair trade's done, the size, and I mean last year alone, 170 million pound in fair trade premiums went back to producers. Coming from over 25 years, coming from nothing. But going back to the point, yeah, the resistance was significant. So it's interesting actually that, and I can just sort of move aside slightly, my job before supporting fair trade and driving fair trade was actually within the buying team responsible for, amongst other things, confectionery. So in the likes of 1994, 95, 96, I sat with my buyer on a 2 or 3 times a year basis to look at the range that we were offering the customer to make it work as best we could for them and also for us as a business. And then, of course, that's on behalf of the rest of the societies, of which were many, many more in those days. So we were guardians of the range. And in the days, of course, of massive brands in confectionery, the likes of Cadbury on TV and Nestle and Mars, were the big players who dominated, had these multi-million-pound budgets to spend on advertising. And my job really was to go to the buyer every 3 or 4 months with a recommendation for the range and how we should change things. And based on conversations with suppliers, based on market trends, based on what I could see competition doing. And one of my start points was always the sales figures of the last period, to see how things were going with the range that we had, to see what we could get rid of to make space for new up and coming significant brand launches, for example. And there's one product that always propped up the league table of sales, and it was the very first Fairtrade product to be launched in the UK, which was the Mayor Gold chocolate bar. And it sat there selling very little, probably to the same 6 or 7 people every couple of weeks. But as a business proposition, it just didn't work. And my first, embarrassingly, I suppose, my very first experience of Fairtrade was going to the buyer saying, well, we should get rid of this Fairtrade thing because nobody buys it, and that'll create a bit of shelf space to put other stuff in. And the response back was, yeah, totally agree, we should make moves now to delist the product. But then there was a process to go through in terms of that range and how the decisions will be taken. And it was blocked, and it was blocked on the basis that we don't know what it is, it doesn't sell, but it doesn't matter because it's something that the members want, so we have to leave it in. So it was saved by the skin of its teeth and saved by the members that the Mayor Gold chocolate bar stayed in the range. And then from there, soon after, I sort of jumped ship from the buying side. I was never a buyer. I was never really purely commercially headed. I was always much more about community and people anyway. And I got this position within the business on we called it then the corporate marketing team. So yeah, looking then at all the social well-being and the policies. And one of my first jobs was to go back to the buyer to say, that Mayor Gold chocolate bar that we tried to delist that time, we need to extend its distribution to every store, because the strategy is that we want to begin to embrace and push Fairtrade and mainstream it over years. And of course, you can imagine what that response was immediately. And then on from there, difficult conversations were had with the buying team within bananas. There was an opportunity to bring in bananas, and we got that through on the basis that Sainsbury's were also pushing to be the first in the UK with this. This was now 2000 we were talking. And it was a race with Sainsbury's to actually be declared the first in the UK with Fairtrade bananas. And it was only that competitive pressure that made the buyer relent and said, okay, well, we'll put it in some stores. And we got it through, again, by the skin of its teeth. And the secret then really was, it was never going to work. It was never going to survive as a concept unless it actually became commercially viable. And that was probably the first 10 years of our work on Fairtrade, was to prove to the business that it could work and prove to the business that it was the right thing to do. So it's quite a lot of, I guess, manoeuvring on my part with talking to like-minded individuals in the organisation, certainly talking to membership colleagues to make them aware of products that we're looking to bring in, to get members actively engaged in pushing the business back to say, we want more Fairtrade stuff in, we want more Fairtrade listings. I can't buy Fairtrade bananas in my store. Please, can you put it in my store? So it was a bit of an underground movement going on, really, to try and create a demand. And it was only when the demand was created that the business then began to say, actually, this is something that we think we can and should support. And that moment in time came, actually, I can pinpoint it to 2002. And what happened was that, having launched an own label Fairtrade chocolate bar in 2000, just after the bananas came into the UK, within 2 years, we were looking to switch all of the own brand Fairtrade chocolate bars into Fairtrade. But alongside that, again, the buying resistance was countered by the PR opportunities that it presented to the business. And so we actually worked with Divine Chocolate, who we'll all know, developed the range up of Co-op brand products that came from cocoa from Cocoa in Ghana and from Kasintula Sugar Co-op in Malawi, and came up with this very strong communication platform to talk to the members about what we were doing, and really said to the members, but you have to buy into this, you have to work with us on creating the demand, because if we don't sell it, who knows, what the next step will be for our Fairtrade plans. We launched a hard-hitting report at the same time, which was the chocolate report, which talked about exploitation again. It was it sort of really laid bare the issues in the industry, that there was child trafficking going on. There'd been a Channel 4 documentary which we picked up on, and we worked with Anti-Slavery International on putting together this informative piece of work for the media. And the media picked up on it, and we ended up actually on national BBC News with this move that the Co-op's doing all this stuff on Fairtrade cocoa because of all these issues that we didn't know about. And And so the next step really from a commercial perspective and breaking down that barrier, going back to the point, is that there's quite a lot of work done with regards, okay, so we're going to get PR, we're going to get positioning, we're going to get brand value, but what's it going to do to sales of Co-op label products? And the whole premise was built around, okay, so it's confectionery, it's chocolate bars, and people that come in to buy Co-op label chocolate, it's an impulse purchase. So if they come in next week and it's gone fair trade and the price has gone up and the bar weight's gone down, which we had to do to make it actually appeal to actually get it to the shelf. If that happens and the consumer resists, what are they likely to do? So the modelling was all around, well, they're hardly going to just say, well, I'm not going to eat any chocolate then, I'm just going to leave the store. They're likely to buy something else from the shelf. So all this modelling was done. It took a long time to work out that, okay, so if we lose X percent of Co-op brand sales into brand, then this will happen to the overall category margin. And if it's a higher percentage, we'll lose this. So we were working on a sort of worst case scenario of I think it was up to £1 million might be lost in this one venture. And if we'd have actually lost that amount, then I think that would have been the end of that fair trade pursuit. But what actually happened was because of the members, because of the passion for doing the right thing, and because of the Co-op values, and because of the strong comms on it, we actually saw things move in a different direction, and we saw branded sales actually switch into own label. So we ended up then with a position that, from a buyer's perspective, that he was seeing, I don't know, a loss on Cadbury Dairy Milk, but coming into Co-op brand, which meant that he was making more money than he was before because the brand was such a low margin product. So overall, the sales increased because of the consumer demand, the member shift towards fair trade. Over the next 12 months, the sales of Co-op label went up by 50%. So that's a resounding success. But probably more importantly, the buyer's margin was much more healthy than it was before fair trade. And so the structure of the business was that the buyer for confectionery reported into a senior buyer, category manager, whatever he was called, who also looked after coffee, amongst other things. And he came to me to say, this fair trade stuff on confec is great. Can we do anything like this on coffee? So suddenly it switched, and suddenly the business was demanding that we try to drive fair trade further because commercially it now worked. But up until that point, it was a real uphill battle. And then, of course, that means that you can go to the societies and talk about the success as well, and that it's actually the right business decision as well as the right decision from a social perspective. So eventually, it took a while, but we broke those barriers down. And then after that, really, things changed and the appetite grew. And it was just onwards and upwards, and the buyers were sort of, every time there's a fair trade opportunity, were much more open to having a discussion around putting it into the range.
I think that's massively useful and insightful, Brad. Thank you. There's a couple of points to pull out, I think. The first, and I'm sure many people on this call will know, but just to be aware, Mid Counties formed in 2005 out of two predecessor societies, West Midlands Co-op and Oxford Swindon and Gloucester Co-op. Both of those predecessor societies were firm supporters of fair trade from day one, I think it's fair to say. The second bit, I guess you would argue that's early 1990s, late 1990s member insight. Member insight is hugely important to us in all the different consumer businesses we have and all our policy strategies, everything we do. Certainly since Phil's been chief exec under a current board, we've got member insight is probably the biggest thing, I think, trying to make sure that we are doing what our members want and involving members in those decisions. And it's good to know that we have a legacy record of doing that. As well. And I love your quote about a single raindrop. We have a program at the moment for members called One Change, which again on its own, one individual member can't do a lot, but put the synergy effect together and suddenly together we can make an awful amount of difference. So I want to come back to you in a second, Brad, if I can, in terms of the impact that that's then had since that time. But perhaps Sarah Jane, you've made a huge difference, I think, to a society and to retail in the 18 months or so you've been here. Presumably, you still have the same challenges today in terms of we haven't got elastic shelves. How do we make sure we're putting new member ranges out there? How do we make sure we're supporting fair trade? And I guess it's probably an opportune time to say, what are we doing, Sarah Jane, at the moment during Fair Trade Fortnight to support where we are, given that we know our members are so keen on fair trade products?
Well, just as Brad said, it's about accessibility. So it's about making sure that people understand what fair trade is and understand what it means. And so, yes, we're using in-store promotions at the moment to help to define that accessibility and to help make that clear in stores. But we're using those deals. So we have 70 own label Co-op Fairtrade deals on our hot beverages with up to 20% off those lines running at the moment for the next 2 weeks. But it's also about talking about all of that broader deal set that we've got. So we've increased some of the distribution of some of our Fairtrade lines to complement what we're doing with those offers, but we're also running something that we call a swipe and win. So any of our members that use their membership card and purchase Fairtrade products over the next 2 weeks will be entered into a competition to win their basket of shopping on any particular day. We're also complementing that activity with some more specialist activities on Fairtrade in our Bourton and Morton food markets. So in those 2 stores, we're running Fairtrade cookery masterclasses. We're also doing children's Fairtrade cake baking and some Fairtrade wine tasting. So really starting to bring Fairtrade to life and talk to different types of consumers and different types of members around what we're doing. And it's not just in food, so we're complementing that with promoting what we're doing with the Fairphone 4 from Co-op Mobile. So we've got dedicated blogs running on Fairtrade Gold and how the Fairphone is more sustainable, along with making sure that we're highlighting a number of other Fairtrade organisations. So we're talking about Tradecraft and People Tree and Honey Street Handmade, highlighting the breadth of Fairtrade products that are available across a wide range of resources and sources, and helping to make it easier for our members to access some of those products and become more aware of them. And then obviously today's co-op conversation is a key part of what we're doing, and today is obviously being recorded so that we can share that more broadly and talk about what we're doing. And that's also complemented with the schools that we partner with. So we have created a Fairtrade resource pack, and that's going out to our partner schools so that we can really involve children in spotlighting what we're doing across Fairtrade Fortnight and really helping them to understand more about Fairtrade too.
No, that's brilliant, and I guess I think I'll be the first, or we'll all be the first to say really, but the member app has helped massively. Just in terms of getting that access to information, enabling members to be able to see what products we've got, all the offers we've got, and so on and so forth. And obviously that's something we're going to be pushing far more over the coming months and years. And I guess it's fair to say, Sarah Jane, as well, clearly the Co-op Fairtrade Fortnight is a big calendar event. But fair trade, to steal a phrase, isn't just for Christmas, it's all year round. We will presumably be doing a lot of things around fair trade on an ongoing basis. This isn't just a 2-week hit and then we move off and concentrate on something else.
Yeah, so Fairtrade Fortnight for us is just a spotlight really, because it's quite widely known out there amongst retailers. So it just gives us an opportunity to really give a spotlight to what we're doing. So from our point of view, it's absolutely about Fairtrade every single day, and obviously it's so important to all of the communities that we support through the activity that we do, that it isn't just something that we focus on for a short period of time. So we're looking at how we can make sure that we've got enhanced member offers every single month, every single promotion period throughout the year, so we can be talking about fair trade continuously. As I said before, we're looking at how we can expand the amount of range that we have on fair trade through both our own label ranges and what we buy through Co-op Group, but also with local suppliers and purchasing from branded suppliers where we're confident that they have the right fair trade approach. And we'll also make sure that we're doing that through partner opportunities and anybody else that we work with closely. And it's a really, really important part of how we align our values.
Okay, that's brilliant. I want to come back, if I can. I want to concentrate, Brad, perhaps for a minute or two on the impact that fair trade purchases have made. And then Sarah, if I can, I'll pick up this point about competing marks, whether a Rainforest Alliance or whatever, in the chat. And Vivian will then talk about possibilities of extension range, whether it's tomatoes, as you say, whether it's rice, whatever whatever it may be. So Brad, given the fact that we've now been mid-counties as much as anything, our predecessors been working with Fairtrade now for 25, 26, 27 years, that must have had a significant impact on some of these developing countries and some of the communities in those countries.
Yeah.
Can you talk to a little bit about what that Fairtrade premium has, perhaps explain Fairtrade premium first, and then the impact it's had, if you could.
Okay, just before I do, what associated to that is just picking up on something Sarah Jane said. Another fantastic communication from mid-counties is actually the website this year. So I would encourage anybody that's not been on the website to have a look on the website, because what you've got on there is access to producers themselves through videos, and they'll do a far better job than I could ever do in terms of talking about impacts. But for my part, I can give you, I mean, and for me, it does go back to this, and you know, it's a bit twee, but this many little raindrops thing. It is about making people know that individuals can make a massive difference, and don't get lost in this, you know, the huge figures. So I just picked up from the Fairtrade Foundation that there's almost 2 million farmers and workers in the Fairtrade system now. But you need to really sort of stop and think that that's 2 million individual people with families, with kids, with lives, and you know, with challenges. And we're talking about individuals. We're not talking about 2 million. We're talking about 2 million individuals. And I thought it probably the best way to explain how that impacts that I've seen over the years, and it sort of inspired me to really drive Fairtrade as much as I've done, is meeting some of those individuals. So a couple of stories to share, really, but premium's not the only thing. So you probably know, that most of you, that the Fairtrade, the way Fairtrade works, and it talks a lot about Fairtrade Premium, which is this little bit of an extra piece of cash that goes into producers, and they spend it democratically based on their own local needs and requirements, in often social, but sometimes their own business, reinvestment in the business. But that's the little add-on that makes Fairtrade always better than non-Fairtrade. But as critical, and sometimes more critical than that, is actually the stability of price that Fairtrade can offer. So Fairtrade is based on this minimum price scenario, whereby a tea farmer, a coffee farmer knows from one day to the next that no matter how the markets shift, how the commodity markets shift, which are sort of governed in New York Stock Exchange, the world markets move, they're very volatile. If you're not in Fairtrade, then you can hit crisis quite quickly as a commodity trader, as a commodity farmer trading into those sorts of areas. But Fairtrade has this baseline price with the premium always on top. So no matter how bad things get, if you're in the Fairtrade system, you know you've got this safety net, which is always going to cover your sustainable cost of production. So that's the second element. So you've got premium, you've got price, and the third, again, really, really important element is the empowerment, the fact that it is about, within the small producer scenarios within Fairtrade, it's about cooperatives. So it's about everything that we know. It's about voting, it's about democracy, and it's about all of those things that help to ensure that there's no marginalisation of individuals or particular groups within a society, so that everybody counts and everybody's voice is heard. So if I've got time, I'll just give you a couple of examples of that. So my first experience of premium, which was probably the single biggest impact that I've known in Fairtrade, because it was my first impact, was when I went to Ghana in 2003. So I mentioned before, we switched all the chocolate bars to Fairtrade under Co-op label. A year after, I went out there to see what that really meant. So I've not seen any Fairtrade in action before. I'd seen quotes and seen photographs and I'd heard things. But actually travelling out to Ghana, it's the first time I've been to Africa. And I was in the back of a 4x4 being driven to a remote community. And it was quite exciting, obviously, being a first time and driving down this. It was like a red dirt track road, really. It just went on and on and on this road. It was like really rich red, the soil, and the embankments were rich and red. And it was almost like a forest of just lush green trees. So you just had this contrast of red and green, and it just went on for miles and miles and miles. And we came upon this bit of a dip in the road, splashed through this bit of a stream that was running across the road and up the other side, whereupon in a clearing there was this big shiny stainless steel water pump, and it just looked so out of place being there, having travelled for all that time and just seeing nothing but green trees and red soil. And suddenly this alien form was there, and there was a guy filling some containers of water. And we stopped and got out and we started talking to him. And he was from the local village, which was just a little bit further up the road. And he was saying that it was brand new, this pump, and it changed the village's life because they didn't have a reliable water source before. And this had been paid for by Fairtrade premiums through cocoa sales. And I remember asking the question, so if this is here now, where did you go for your water before? And he said, you've just driven through it. It's the stream. So we walked back down, we went to this stream, and it was absolutely filthy, mosquitoes all over it, and God knows what else in it. But that was the water supply for that village until Fairtrade intervened. So then, as we're walking back up to the to this water pump where he'd left these containers with water, I was explaining who I was and who I was representing and what we were doing, and it was a real sort of moment in my life. He actually turned to me with this massive smile on his face and said, "So this is here because of you." And it was just such a humbling experience. And I just thought, well, actually, you're not far wrong. It's here because the co-op has committed to Fairtrade cocoa with Divine chocolate. And I remember thinking at that point that this village, this man, has clean water because of work we're doing in the UK, decisions being taken in Manchester and across the UK. And we've just changed lives, and we don't know really the impact of this until we've seen it for ourselves. So the premium was absolutely critical. And then knowing then that every product we sold had this Fairtrade premium attached to it, it just made me think, well, when I get back, I'm just going to sell, obviously, as many as I can, do whatever I can to drive more and more sales to see a lot more of this happening. So that was the
right. Just hold on that point if I can, because I think that strikes to the heart of possibly Sarah's question as well. You have been, I think, probably the preeminent ambassador of Fairtrade, the impact it's made over 20, 25 years or so. And the stories you have told have directly influenced members, societies, etc., and other retailers such as Sainsbury's, whoever, to get behind Fairtrade. So given that impact, there are now Sainsbury's, you've been an outspoken critic of it, have moved away, it appears, from Fairtrade. We've got the Rainforest Alliance, we've got the Waitrose Foundation, we have a myriad of different marks. If the impact is that great by this synergy of everybody acting together, why are organisations moving away, and what impact is that having on some of these communities, in your opinion?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. The first thing I say is, yes, I have been a critic of Sainsbury's, and actually did strike up the very first petition against their move against Fairtrade tea when they dropped that, and then basically sort of stepped back to allow the campaigners to pick that up, because it wasn't something that as a retail competitor I could really do with any sort of real authority, I guess. They're not, it's difficult to comment on. I don't think we should tar them all with the same brush, let's say. So when Cadbury were the first to sort of step backwards, so they'd been supporting Fairtrade cocoa farmers through dairy milk, and they were paying a Fairtrade price, and then decided that they were going to invest in their own sourcing. I think there's been some good come of that as far as I've been able to pick up, and I can sort of understand that as one of the biggest cocoa buying companies in the world, they can control to a degree how things happen back at origin. So as long as they're investing in the producers and they are looking after the producers, and the one, I guess, comfort in all of that is that they still do work with the Fairtrade Foundation. So they might have dropped the Fairtrade model in terms of pricing, but they have been monitored by the Fairtrade Foundation in terms of the work that's going on in country with regards to the cocoa producers. And I think they very much know that there's a crisis in the cocoa industry. They need to act as a business if they're to survive in terms of chocolate, and invest in the ways that they feel is right. Similarly, Nestle with their Kit Kat announcement, disappointing and all the rest of it, but they do have their own cocoa plan, which again, when you go and read into it, it all sounds very good, all very plausible. So maybe, I mean, there's no affiliation now with the Fairtrade Foundation on that one, but you can sort of understand why, as a manufacturer, an importer, and somebody close to the industry, how and why that may be something they prefer to do. When it comes to a retailer, absolutely not. The Waitrose Foundation is different. The Waitrose Foundation was there probably at the same sort of time as Fairtrade was beginning to take shape, and it works in a complementary way, really. It worked certainly when I was looking at it a few years ago as a retail model. It was operating in a very sort of limited way in South Africa, and it was working with suppliers, and it actually added to the good of what Fairtrade was doing. The Sainsbury's thing, on the other hand, I think was a total cop-out, and I think it was all about just trying to save money. Because as a business doing all we were doing on Fairtrade, we've looked, the co-op has looked at, can we do more? Can we do different? And are there ways that we could actually control things better and work more closely with our own farming groups and worker groups, but without the Fairtrade model being in place? And the answer is no, because that's the whole infrastructure that's been built. They're the experts. They've got, you understand that the Fairtrade system is actually owned by the producers themselves. They've got a 50% plus ownership. How could anybody come up with something that was fairly traded without any representation that was anything like that? So I think it was about the same thing. I like talking out of turn, and I don't care because anymore. But I think it was about cost. I think they talk about piloting this tea thing. The fairly traded tea that they launched was a bit of a sham all round. I was totally upset by the fact that they were actually using pictures of farmers on there talking about how fairly traded tea was doing all this great stuff. And in fact, those farmers on the pack I knew were in the Fairtrade system and were nothing to do with wanting to be working with Sainsbury's. They'd just been told this is how it is from now on. 250,000 farmers in Kenya jointly signed, or on behalf of, sent a letter to Sainsbury's to say, please don't ditch us and go down this route, and they ignored them. If the farmer says they want fair trade, then that's good enough for me, and that should have been good enough for Sainsbury's. But no, they decided to continue with this pilot, which has since been dropped. So there's no fairly traded tea now. So the Sainsbury's tea has now gone down the Rainforest Alliance route. And just expanding then, just touching on Rainforest Alliance, I can't profess to know the ins and outs of Rainforest, but what I do know is that a good few years ago, I was in the Côte d'Ivoire, sat in front of a cooperative manager who was actually exporting Fairtrade cocoa and also exporting Rainforest Alliance certified cocoa. And we were talking about the difference between the two. And he was talking, as farmers always did, as managers and producers always did, that Fairtrade is the best system for them. And what he told me was that because Rainforest Alliance was now being given a platform in terms of brands being able to say, we're sustainable, we're working with Rainforest, it's independent, he saw a huge order for Fairtrade cocoa switched away from Fairtrade into Rainforest. So whoever that buyer was could still profess to be sustainable, could still talk about supporting third-party certification, but it cost the farmers £250,000 in one order because they in premium, because they moved into the cheaper Rainforest Alliance no premium required model. So again, a cost saving, whoever that was that placed that order, they got the same cocoa, they just didn't pay as much for it, but the losers were the farmers because they didn't get the premium. So
that probably, Brad, is apologies for cutting across, is probably the bit I was driving at really with, as a consumer, forget the fact for a second I work for Mid Counties Co-op, as a consumer, I want to know that if I'm buying fair trade, there is a clear, transparent governance model in place, taking it back to the communities in which it supports. The problem with moving away from a ubiquitous label is, by definition, you've then got consumer confusion over which is supporting which is supporting which, I suppose. In terms of the going forward position, and again, just linking in with that, and just for my interest as much as anything, given some of the big brands you've mentioned have moved away from fair trade, Cadbury's, whoever, forget other retailers now, that presumably for every retailer will have cut the amount of sales they have of fair trade products over the last 2, 3, 4 years or so. Because by definition, if you've got Cadbury's have moved away, etc., it will look as though we're all selling less fair trade.
There's been actually the last figures show a 3% increase in fair trade in the UK, and the reason for that is because at the same time that you've got the challenges actually at the consumer end, that the choice, losing the likes of Kit Kat and Cadbury and things that are mainstream sellers, to lose those, and the Sainsbury's tea even, they disappear, so the consumer's left with less choice, so the sales actually drop on the consumer purchase, but the actual purchases from the producers have increased by 3%, and the reason for that is because there's also been, at the same time as those losses, there's been some gains which are not as obvious. So, for example, the Co-op itself, back in 2017, committed to all the cocoa that was sourced for all the own label products, be the fair trade or not, would be sourced under fair trade terms. So you've got a sort of hidden fair trade purchase there that's going on. Likewise, surprisingly but commendably, Lidl and Aldi have also, within cocoa, have gone down this route of committing to fair trade across confectionery, across chocolate products. So if you go into a Lidl and Aldi, you look at their chocolate bars, they've not got the full fair trade mark on a lot of them, most of them, but they do have a symbol that says that the cocoa in there is actually fair trade sourced. So you have got this volume coming through that wasn't there before, that's compensating for the losses of the brands.
Thanks for that, Brad. I'm slightly conscious of time. We've got a couple of questions in from our young co-operators, who I've committed to our young co-operators. I would make sure those questions are asked. So, Sarah Jane, to you, if I can. From Mid Counties' point of view, a fairly obvious question, I suppose. What's our best-selling fair trade product?
It's bananas. Very proud for it to be bananas, as it's one of the first products that we launched as a fair trade product. So last year in 2021, we sold 2 million bananas in the UK, and 100% of our bananas are fair trade. So we're very, very proud of that. And then in value, we have 40 fair trade wine products in our range, and the value of our wine is about 3.5 million. So bananas comes to, they're about £1 each, so it comes to about 2 million in value, and fair trade wine is 3.5.
And I'm going to move away from young co-operators for a second and go back to my own heart. And presumably we've just made changes to a South African wine range at the moment, Sarah Jane?
That's right. And we've South African has gone 100% fair trade.
Which is good. So that's all Co-op own brand, as well as all South African wine that we sell is now fair trade, which is great.
Yeah.
And in terms of the number of fair trade products we sell, Sarah Jane, roughly how many now?
223 across Mid Counties, across our ranges, and 172 of those are own label. So really driving it from our own label point of view, which was just over 9 million last year.
And I can see some of the questions in the chat, and clearly that we won't be stocking 220 odd products in every single store we've got, but it's fair to say that every store will carry a reasonable selection of fair trade, I guess. Especially
in the biggest categories. So the two biggest categories that we do are bananas and sugar. So bananas and sugar will be in every single one of our stores. There will be a range of wine in every store. But obviously, as you get through to the smaller stores, it gets a bit less. And tea and coffee, there is a range of tea and coffee in the majority of our stores too. And we also have, complementing that, chocolate in not quite so many stores, orange juice, fair trade roses, and also cotton wool. There are more fair trade products sold across the UK, so it's really important. Obviously, we're a food business dominated by convenience, but with some bigger stores. But obviously, across the UK, really important to note that actually there's a lot of fair trade clothing sold in the UK, more toiletries, paper and basketware type products. So I do direct you all to fairtrade.org to understand a little bit more about some of the things that we don't sell specifically at Mid Counties, but are more broadly sold too. And again, that's one of the advantages of the app, I suppose, is that we can start putting links on there to other, for those people who are the propensity to buy fair trade is higher, we can make sure that we've got links to, when we both put in the pack, whether it's People Tree, Honey Street, Handmade, etc. So I guess the question to both of you, really,
clearly we've been over years coffee, tea, cocoa, bananas. Roses was one of my favourites, Brad. It will stay with me for a long time, walking through the centre of Manchester in a nice little suit with a nice little briefcase with bunches of Fairtrade flowers straight into 20,000 Man United fans with a reception that wasn't quite what I expected. But in terms of products, Vivian's mentioned in there about tomatoes, which seems a fair shout. I guess a question to both of you, probably Sarah Jane, you first. If there was one product area that you'd like to see being fair trade, what would it be? And I'll do the same one to Brad after if I can.
For me, it's rice. The reason I say rice is because rice is a massive global commodity and affecting so many nations across the world. And there's so much unfairness within its supply chain, unfair practices and unfair processes. And I just think that whole industry needs some help to make it a fairer world. So very passionate about, and it's a volume thing. You know, if you think about the number of Asian countries across the world buying rice and what that means in the global supply chain, I think rice is the one I'm most passionate about next.
And you'd sort of hope, as part of the International Co-op Alliance, there could be something that could be done with Principle 6, the cooperation amongst cooperatives, that we could do something along there. That's a great shout. And Brad, same question to you.
It's the same answer, but given that Sarah J has covered that one off, and the rationale, as she said, is quite clear. I also think green beans from Kenya, which have been around in fair trade on and off, but not in any number, just on the basis that I met quite a few farmers when I was over in Kenya on the tea mission, and I was just absolutely gobsmacked by the wastage of beans because they were not of appropriate standard and quality for export, and these farmers that were growing them were basically getting them as far as the export points before being sold, or we're not going to pay you for them because they're not good enough. And I think if Fairtrade could intervene in a big way within green beans, I think that could change a lot of lives in Kenya specifically. It's probably a bit personal, that, because these are the people that I was actually talking to about tea, but I think that would open up opportunities no end. And then citrus from South Africa is another one. It's quite interesting, and it's just brilliant again that we are world leaders in terms of co-op and fair trade wines. We invented the category, actually. We actually launched fair trade wine, 2 words, with Tradecraft back in 2001, before fair trade standards even came around, and worked with Fairtrade International to actually develop those standards. And yes, we've got the biggest wine range, the biggest wine cellar, all those things. But in South Africa, the wine grapes actually from the vine, before they even hit the bottles, are absolutely sumptuous. And I think there's a market there. And I did talk to them about this. Why don't you export your grapes? And another, the Co-op is selling grapes at the moment, but you could actually potentially come up with a nice little spin on selling Chardonnay grapes, for example, as a bunch under fair trade, as a nice little add-on to the range. But we never quite made it with that one.
Brad, Sarah, Jane, that's fantastic. And I suppose the thing that's shone through from both of you really is this principle of for the last 27 years, it's what our members want. The fact that it's called fair trade, it does exactly what it says on the can. It's not charity. It's not selling inferior products because it's the right thing and makes us all feel good. It's doing the right thing, and increasingly look at the quality of that. But the biggest thing to me, I think, which Brad and Phil's put in the chat as well, it really come across, is the impact it's made in these communities now over a really long period of time. We've been fortunate as mid-counties, as I said right at the start. We've been involved in this thing, I think, since you first came on the scene, Brad, in terms of fair trade. We've got an absolute commitment to go forward. We've been recognised by the Co-op News in terms of what we do and really pushing this forward. And the one thing I'll urge every one of our members is, what would you like us to do more in this area? I guess the obvious is telling the story more in terms of the impact it's having. The obvious will be of making sure we have the right ranges in the right stores, and take some of the comments in chat. But I keep going back to the same point. It is this principle of awareness, and the fact that we can now promote via the app, via the website, other fair trade suppliers that we can't physically stock in the stores, I think will make a massive difference. I'm conscious of time. I have a horrible feeling I'm looking at Tara. This was meant to have finished at 7:15, but I'm blaming the contributions from. So it's been fun.
Absolutely, and I think it's very sad actually that we're ending this session, but I think, you know, an amazing session, and one that clearly is very dear to many hearts.